Hello and welcome to the 6th video of this tutorial series. In the last video, we created, customized, and embedded some views. In this video, we're going to set up the roles, security, and permissions for our app. We're going to have some pretty simple security, and we're only going to have two roles, a role for general app users and a role for project managers. So let's begin by heading over to the Roles and Users section of the app editor. As you can see, we currently have two roles, editors and readers. Every new application starts with these two roles. Let's start by renaming the editor's role. To do so, hover your mouse cursor over the role and select the Edit Role icon over here on the right end. Let's call this role Project Managers, and then click Save. Now, let's rename the reader's role to Users. We'll need to refresh or navigate away from and then return to the Roles and Users section for the names to update. So let's do that quickly. Nice. Let's take a moment and get used to the options available to us here. Across the header bar, we can create new roles. When creating a role, you are given two options for managing the role's user list. The first option is Managed. This is the most common option. It means users will be added manually to the role by an app designer or admin. Both of our roles here are managed. Form-defined roles have their user list tied to the value of a directory lookup field on a form, that is, a user or multiple users field, meaning it can vary for each record. Let's close out of this window. The Add User button is one way we can add users to our roles. Users must first be added to your platform in the platform settings by a platform superadmin before they can be added to applications. Here, you can search your platform directory for the user or users you want to add. Then, you select which roles to place them in and decide whether or not to send them an email notifying them that they have been added. Let's close out of this window. The next option is Import Shared Roles. Shared roles are created by a platform superadmin in the Users Management section of the platform settings. Shared roles are pre-filled roles that can be imported into your applications using this button. As you can see here, we have one shared role called All Domain Users, which, as its title suggests, includes all users on the platform. After importing a shared role, you may then configure the role's permissions within the app. Let's close out of this window. Finally, Import Users allows you to import a list of users from a CSV file. The list must include both a name and email column in order for the import to work. You may then select which role to import the user list into, and finally you may choose whether or not to send a welcome email. Let's close out of this window. If you hover your mouse over the role, you will see some options on the far right. The pencil icon, as we know, is used to edit the name and description of the role. The next icon is used to manage the member list for the role. This is another place you can add users to a role, and also where you can remove users from a role. The next icon, the shield icon, takes us to the Permissions tab of this right side panel. Note that this panel can be opened by simply clicking on a role. These icons are simply used for quicker navigation. The Permissions tab is used to view and manage some overarching permissions for the role. As you can see, we have both of our forms displayed here, and clicking this arrow opens up the permissions for the form and its associated views. We'll come back here in a minute, but let's finish with the available options. The trash can icon is used to delete a role, and finally the Audit tab on the right side panel gives us a history of changes made to the role. Now let's go ahead and set some permissions for our roles. I'll start with the Project Manager's role. Select the shield icon to open the role's permissions. Then let's open up the project's form permissions. We're going to give this role comprehensive permissions except for a few fields. Since we can't edit the field permissions here, we're just going to keep everything ticked on and give them full access to each stage by making sure it's set to Edit and Delete Permissions, which is the trash can icon, and we'll edit the more granular permissions later. Let's collapse the project's form permissions and open up the task's form permissions. Everything here is ticked on, and each stage has edit and delete permissions, so we're good to go. Now let's select the user's role and navigate to the Permissions tab. Go ahead and expand the project's form permissions. We want the user's role to have the ability to respond to and complete tasks, but they don't need the ability to create, edit, or delete projects, although they should be able to view them. So let's tick off the Can Create toggle. Then let's remove permissions from the draft stage and leave view-only permissions for the active and archive stages. Finally, we can leave permissions on for each of the project's views. Let's move on to the tasks form. Users don't need the ability to create tasks for this app. We're leaving that up to the project managers, so we can toggle this off. Note that this also removes access to the Add New Record button from the Easy Add Records feature we enabled on our In Progress Tasks view. We don't need the users to see draft tasks as they haven't been submitted yet, so we can remove permissions from the draft stage. The rest here can remain as view only, since the users don't need the ability to edit the task records. Keeping these permissions as view only also removes access to the Edit Cells in Table feature we added to our In Progress Tasks view. However, they will still have access to the action buttons, as we'll see in a minute, and they will also still have the ability to add comments in the confirmation dialog that we added to the Complete Task action button, despite having only view access to the form. Finally, we can leave permissions toggled on for all of the task views. That does it for the permission settings here. Let's get a bit more specific with our permissions now. Let's start by navigating to our project's form and selecting the workflow card to open the workflow editor. So here we are in the workflow editor again. This time we're going to focus on the middle section here, which is the permissions for the form. As you can see, we have an additional role called Record Owner. For this tutorial, our record owner will have the same permissions as our project manager's role, since project managers are the only ones who can create records. You may choose to give this role unique permissions if, for example, you want the person who created the record to be the only one who can edit or delete it. But for the sake of time and simplicity, we'll keep this role and the project manager's role identical. So let's get started with the project manager's and record owner role permissions. We'll start with the draft stage, so make sure it's selected in the stage list. We want to keep the permissions here as edit and delete, which they already are. Then let's open up the field permissions by clicking the Field Security button for the project manager's role. So this is the Field Security panel. On the top left here, we can double check that we're in the right place. As you can see, we're in the Field Security settings for the project manager's role in the draft stage. Right below this are the action buttons for the stage. We have our Submit button here, and we could choose whether or not to show it by clicking on it. If the background has color, that means the role has permission to view and click it. Hovering your mouse cursor over the button will also tell you what clicking it will do, either hide or show. Let's make sure we leave this button visible so the project managers can submit their project forms. Let's just quickly look at the other options available in the header of this panel. On the right side, we have a Preview as Role button. This will simply give you a preview of how the form will appear to the user with the permissions you've set. Copy Permissions lets you copy the permissions you've set for all fields, specific sections, or specific fields to other roles and/or stages. We'll be using this feature in a moment. We have the Back button, which simply closes the security panel. And finally, we have the User Can Save checkbox. This does exactly what it says, controls whether or not users in the role can save the record. This is useful for instances where you want a role to have the ability to edit a record and save the changes without having to use an action button. Since we're editing the draft stage permissions, if we keep this box checked, a project manager could save the record instead of submitting it, and the record would remain in the draft stage until the Submit action button is clicked. This could be useful if a project is upcoming but not yet active, and we could even create a scheduled trigger similar to our overdue task trigger to automatically check the start date of draft records and change them to active when the start date comes. If you opt into doing this, just make sure you create or edit one of your views to show draft records, and you may wish to include draft records on the calendar view as well. Additionally, you may wish to create a new stage for upcoming projects instead of using the draft stage. This solution would be preferable, and we'll see why in a moment. Since we don't have a view showing draft records and we're not creating that trigger for this tutorial, I'm going to uncheck this box to prevent the creation of draft stage project records. Now let's get into the field permissions. Here, we can see all the fields and sections on our form, split into two tabs, just like our form. Each field has individual hide, view, and edit permissions, which can be selected here. Additionally, sections have the same three options. Selecting one of these options in the section will change all fields in that section to that option, as you can see here. We want the project managers to be able to edit all of these fields when creating the record, so we'll make sure edit is selected for each field, and we'll do that by selecting the edit button in the section here. Next, let's move over to the Tasks tab. The embedded views on the Tasks tab are not relevant when creating a project record. First, because the embedded views only show records that are assigned to a project. If we're just creating a project, there will be nothing to see in those views. Second, adding tasks in the embedded in progress view using the Add New Record button we enabled won't work as intended while we are still creating a project record, since the project title isn't saved yet. So any tasks we add before the project record has been submitted won't properly pre-fill our task record's project field because the project name doesn't exist yet in the list selection. Because of this, we're going to hide the Tasks tab from the draft stage, and this is why creating a new stage for upcoming projects is preferable to using the draft stage. So let's hide all of the fields in this tab to prevent our project managers from mistakenly adding tasks to a project before submitting it, and we'll do that by clicking the Hide button here in this section. Great, the permissions for project managers in the draft stage are now set. Let's quickly preview our permissions using the Preview button here. Looks good. We can edit everything on the first tab, and the second tab doesn't appear. Now, let's copy these permissions to the record owner stage by using the Copy Permissions button on the header. We want to copy all fields, and we'll select the draft stage, and finally, we'll choose the record owner role, then press Copy. Let's then hit the back button to close the security panel. We don't have anything to configure for the user's role since they don't have access to the draft stage records at all, so let's move on to the active stage by selecting it in the stage list. We want both our project manager's role and our record owner role to have edit and delete permissions here, as they already do, and we want our user's role to have view permissions. Now let's open up this field security settings for our project manager's role. Project manager should have the ability to edit these records at any time, and there aren't any specific fields we need to hide or set to view only, so these settings look good. And let's just double check that they have access to the Archive button. Good. Let's hit back to close the security panel, and let's just double check the record owner permissions. These look good as well. Let's hit back to close this panel, then let's open the Users field security. Since we set the overarching permissions to view only, we can only set the fields to hidden or view only, and they are already all view only, which is what we want. But it looks like they have access to the Archive button, which we don't want, so I'm going to click the button here to remove access. Good. Finally, let's move on to the Archive stage. We originally gave our project managers edit and delete permissions for archived records. I want the project managers to have the ability to delete archive records if necessary, so we're going to keep it this way, but let's open up the field security and change our sections to view only. Archive records don't need to be edited since they are archived, but if we set the overarching permissions to view only, the project managers would lose the ability to delete records. Let's also copy these permissions to the record owner role in the archive stage. Let's hit back to close the panel. The user's role is already set to view only permissions, so they won't have the ability to edit or delete archive records, and all of the fields will be view only, so we don't need to make any changes there. That's it for our projects form security. Let's move on to our tasks form. So let's save and close, then let's select our tasks form and open the workflow editor using the workflow card. Let's make sure the draft stage is selected and these permissions here look good. Let's open the field security for our project managers. The comments section is for the assignee to fill out when completing the task, and we don't need to see it this early, so let's hide it here in the draft stage. And we'll leave user can save checked on, and just make sure our action button is visible. Good. Let's do the same for our record owner field security. Okay. Let's move on to the in progress stage now. We'll start again with the project manager's field security. let's hide the comment section again since we only need to see it when the task has been completed. And the permissions for the rest of the fields here depend on whether or not you want the project managers to be able to edit tasks after they have been submitted and are in progress. I can imagine some scenarios where this will be useful, so I'm going to keep them mostly on edit. One instance where this might be an issue, however, is if the project manager changes the assignee. The new assignee won't get an email notifying them that a task is now assigned to them since the email notification is triggered by the Submit Action button. So we'll make the assignee field view only as a solution. Another solution could be to create an action button in the in progress stage workflow that sends an email notification to the assignee when clicked. That way, if the assignee changes, or you just need to remind the assignee of their task, you can send a notification using the new action button. Keeping the assignee view only would force the project manager to delete the task and recreate it when changing assignees, and the new assignee would then get the original email notification that we set up. With this solution, we could also set up a trigger that triggers on record deletion and have that trigger send an email to the assignee notifying them that a task assigned to them has been removed. We won't be creating that trigger for this tutorial, but if you wanted to do so, you would simply create a new trigger for the tasks form like we did before, except instead of triggering on a schedule, you would select trigger on an action, then choose record deletion as the action, filter by status to only include records in the in progress and overdue stages, and finally add an email and or in-app notification action. That was a bit of a tangent, so let's continue with security. These settings are good, so let's go ahead and copy them to the record owner role using the copy permissions button. And let's actually copy these settings to both the in progress stage and the overdue stage. So let's select copy permissions. We'll do all fields, in progress and overdue stages. And let's select both the record owner as well as the project managers. Nice. Let's then hit back to close the panel and open the users field permissions. View only is good for these fields, except let's also hide the comment section for users as it will pop up in the confirmation dialog when completing a task, and we want them to fill it out there. And then let's copy these permissions to the overdue stage for users. So copy permissions, all fields, overdue stage, and users role. Nice. Great, let's hit back to close the panel and move on to the completed stage. Now let's open up the project manager's field security. Since this task has been completed, there's no need to edit the record, so let's change both of these sections to view only and uncheck user can save. And let's do the same for the record owner role. The user's role is set to view only already, so we don't need to make any changes there. And that does it for our app security. In this video, we set up our 2 application roles, assigned some overarching permissions for forms and views, and then set granular permissions for each role, making sure our users can only see or edit what they need to. In the next video, we're going to create a dashboard, organize our in-app navigation, and just make some minor updates to our app. See you then.